You know, when you hear a movie that is The Man Who Killed Hitler, that feels very much like a, oh, that's like, you know. And then if you hear them, but then you add, and then the Bigfoot, that's another movie, it's entirely, you know? And it's hard to know, are we gonna see a war movie, or are we gonna see like an arty character piece, or are we gonna see a very are we gonna see a monster movie, basically? And what I love about this script is I feel like Bobby's trying to do all of that.
I wanted to have kind of a pulp adventure element to it, and I got to the end of the first 10 pages and the lead character had just killed Hitler, and I realized there's not really anywhere left for the story to go from there. So I started thinking, well, Hitler was a monster, maybe the hero could fight another monster. I started thinking about what that might be, and it could literally be a monster, and it ended up being, well, maybe it'll be the Bigfoot, and I'll work my way towards some version of reality with that. The notion came to me that Hitler was, in World War II, spreading a plague of ideas, and so maybe in 1987, the Bigfoot is spreading a plague that's literal and could affect the world. And went back to the beginning of the script, put the title on it, The Man Who Killed Hitler, and then the Bigfoot, and started writing my way towards that.
It tells a really interesting tale that I think encompasses something that's really important in regard to how people deal with each other today.
My favorite kinds of projects are the ones where you feel like you're sort of entering a director's mind and you get to kind of play in their imagination, and that's really what this film felt like.
I think it's about a couple creatures on their last legs, and one of them is a human being and one of them is a Bigfoot. They've kind of withdrawn from the world equally, and they're kind of the last of their breed.
You think it's one thing, and then turns out to be this really earnest, beautiful, genuine, sad story about what happens to us when we commit acts of violence and don't follow our hearts, and you know, the effects of war on people.
That's the fun of it for me. That's I like to try to do something that's different than I've done before, and maybe different than anybody's done before.
There are creatures about. Following me.
The Man Who Killed Hitler and then the Bigfoot took 12 years to make. And I think that a lot of that was the hesitation in the concept and then the notion of me as a first-time filmmaker. And as those years kind of slid by, more and more good people kind of came around to create a support network to make the movie happen. And in the meantime, I produced a film, I produced another film, and then I produced and wrote and directed the short film Elsie Hooper. And that kind of proved to people, we can trust this guy to make something at this level and with this scope.
You know, somehow Bob got in touch with me, actually before he was thinking about making The Man Who Killed Hitler. And just for kind of general advice. I met him in Williamstown, Massachusetts when we were visiting there, which is not too far from where he lives.
And he would kind of assign me films to take a look at, and I'd kind of like write an essay to him in return.
I hate to say it was mentorship. Just he might have a question or want to talk about something. I might recommend a movie he wanted to see.
When it came time to do Elsie Hooper, he was very interested in that because I described it as full-size puppets. It was going to be shot in black and white. It was going to be an extreme widescreen 2.55. And I think he just thought, well, this is different and this is interesting, and I want to know more about that. And he started helping me kind of conceptualize what that could look like and what that could be like.
It was clear, this is a guy who really understands telling a story visually in film and what's possible.
He and I were talking about it, and he said, I would be an executive producer on this, help get this out here, and I believe in it, and I'm excited about it.
It's having worked for Roger Corman, you really learn what can you do just with hard work and good ideas, and what do you have to throw money at. And Elsie Hooper was, really impressive for how good it looked for how little money and actually time they spent on it.
And that short film was actually what preceded this film in convincing people that I might be able to direct something as ambitious as this script was.
It's about to become my new best friend.
Then when he wrote sent me the script for The Man Who Killed Hitler and then The Bigfoot, I felt like, well, this is really out there. This is a movie I haven't seen before. And then we started talking back and forth about, kind of, very little about the script, but really a lot about the practicalities of making something like that.
The scope of the film was just enormous. But Bob was like, I've got a plan. I've got every frame in my mind down. I'm going to build a team that's going to make this movie what it needs to be.
I gotta say, Bob Krzyzkowski is one of the most amazing storyboard artists, directors I've ever, his production sketches and storyboards and blocking is phenomenal.
It's not about whether somebody's a first-time director or a 10th-time director. We always start with the filmmakers. I knew that when I spoke to Bob, it was like he was a man who lived this film and had a very specific vision for this film. And even though the story was unusual and it was unlike anything I'd ever read before, the minute he opened his mouth, you knew I wanted this guy to captain the ship.
He's had this movie on his mind for years and scouted the locations years in advance too. It's something that's a labor of love, and it's the reason that Richard Urasich and Douglas Trumbull and myself are involved in this. None of us would be involved in this if it was about just a big budget effects feature. This is certainly not that. This is a movie that inspired us by reading the screenplay and by meeting Bob.
Back in the summer of 2010, when I was making a film called The Woman, Bob worked as a co-producer on the film. Shortly after we finished shooting The Woman, Bob gave me his script for The Man Who Killed Hitler and then The Bigfoot. And I was like, wow, this is really special. This is really unique. And I also knew other people around the set were reading the script and that they were, having a very, very emotional response to this. So I was like, wow, there's really, really something here. It's not just me.
When I went back and wrote on the title page of the movie, The Man Who Killed Hitler and then The Bigfoot, I don't know that I thought that would be the title of the movie. It was just a description of what I was writing. And the more I wrote, the more I realized that actually it was kind of a herald for exactly what the movie would be, and then I could kind of use the undercurrent of the story as a bit of a surprise to the audience, the meaning of it, and this character study notion of following this character in two timelines. I felt that the title would bring the audience toward it and then hopefully reward them with something that they weren't expecting. And so whenever I pitched it, I think the title was really helpful because people would always go, what is this? What are you talking about? And I'd show them some conceptual designs or I'd show them some storyboards and they'd go, well, this, I kind of get it. And then if they read the script, they would understand what the point of it was. And people would say maybe we should change the title, maybe it should be something else, but no one would ever propose anything. And here we are, and the title is The Man Who Killed Hitler and Then the Bigfoot, because I never thought of a better one, and nobody else did either.
I mean, when you look at the title of this thing, The Man Who Killed Hitler and Then the Bigfoot, pretty absurd. But it's so absurd that if people are going to say, wow, they're either going to say, I don't want to see that piece of shit, or they're going to say, I can't wait to see this movie.
Just hearing the title is terrific. That may be the greatest title in the history of show business. I don't know how you beat that title. Any interview you ever give, well, what's the movie about? Have you seen the title? Look at the title. Just read the title, then you don't need to talk to me.
Actually, the way they said it was, hey, we have an offer for you for The Man Who Killed Hitler and Then the Bigfoot. And I thought it was 2 separate movies. So I was like, oh my God, I got 2 offers in one day. Thank you for telling me. I thought it was 2 separate movies. But definitely the title attracted me to the movie. And it's just a very well-written script and a character that was interesting to me because it was different than anything else I've sort of done.
I think that people will take the title more seriously once they actually have a chance to see what the movie is.
It reminds me a lot of Beowulf, oddly enough. He fights a monster as a young man, and then we skip to the end of his life, kind of pass over everything, and he has to fight another monster as an older man. And you see, and those two things are juxtaposed, and you kind of get the story of his life from seeing how he's changed, from one to the other.
As the title suggests, sort of a remixing of a lot of familiar elements. I mean, we've all seen a lot of World War II movies, we've all seen plenty of Bigfoot movies, and we've seen movies about aging, but the combination of those elements and the contrast between those elements and the way that Bob has kind of mixed those together and told the story in a non-linear fashion is really what makes it special.
There's a lot of people that want to be there to either mentor Bob or to help him along and help him achieve his vision. I mean, to see Doug Trumbull out on the set was pretty mind-boggling. I saw Doug Trumbull one time in my life, and it was at the premiere for Close Encounters of a Third Kind. And it was the only time I laid eyes on him. And I certainly know his work over a long, long career.
This is the first time I've gotten to work with Doug since Blade Runner. Anytime that we get a chance to catch up with one another, we're still fast friends. And, I think it was a very joyful reunion to get a chance to work with him again.
Douglas Trumbull came on board the film after he'd seen the Elsie Hooper short. The Berkshire Film Commission had seen it and really liked it and thought that if we're making this movie here in Massachusetts, Douglas Trumbull should know about it. And then when I finished the Elsie Hooper short, the Berkshire Film Commission sent it to him, and Doug sent me an email one morning. He said, I'd love to get together with you and talk to you about the future of visual effects in film. And I think it was just an opportunity for us to kind of talk and just spitball ideas, because again, Elsie Hooper had a lot of old school effects and puppetry and kind of this conglomeration of things he was interested in that felt old fashioned and yet kind of new. And so I went and met with him, and he asked what I was working on, and I explained I'm working on The Man Who Killed Hitler and Then the Bigfoot. And I'll never forget the look on his face. He's like, what? And he wanted to know more about it. He said, send me the script. So I sent it to him, and it was kind of like John Sayles. He got in touch and he said, I'd like to help you do this correctly. He said, you're not going to have a lot of money for this, but you're going to be able to pull off the scope you're going for if you think of the visual effects and kind of these shades. And he outlined miniatures, matte paintings, some old school techniques, and then invisible new visual effects techniques that would amplify the scope of the movie.
Yeah, I just think Bob is great, and I really liked his screenplay. I think the story idea for this movie is completely audacious. Very risky territory to go in to make a movie as crazy as this, and he actually makes it work, which is a challenge for any director. And so I just wanted to have a couple of opportunities to just kind of bring some of this old school miniatures and what I call organic effects into this movie, rather than CGI, which would be the traditional way of doing it. These planes would be CGI if we weren't going to try it this way. So the fact that Bob was totally open to giving this a try, it's a risk-free thing, because if it doesn't work, then they'll do it in CGI and then we'll call it a day.
And then Doug personally did a shot of 2 Stukas flying over the castle with cloud tank photography, as old-fashioned as it gets, on rods, shooting right over a camera and a tank of water, and that shot is in the movie. So all of these people came together and kind of supported this thing they knew that they weren't necessarily going to get rich from, but that they were excited to try something a little old-fashioned and something that still felt kind of new to them, I think, in some ways. So
Yeah, this is my kind of night. It's like a lot of really cool, difficult stuff going on that's someone else's problem. I don't have to worry about any of it.
I think that, you know, Bob managed to put together a magnificent cast. I mean, Sam Elliott is a guy that's that iconic and that much of a star who you've grown up watching. You know, there's always a risk of it being kind of a disappointment to meet them in person, but he's a lovely person and he's exactly the kind of hero in real life that you would hope he would be.
Led me off a cliff. Broke my little pinky.
Sorry, come again?
My 5th digit. I broke it.
Well, be careful with that kind of thing.
John came back and said, you know, I think Sam might be right for this movie, and here's the reasons why. It was already kind of apparent to me he looked like the person I'd been drawing for years. There's something about Sam that even from a distance, you believe he's a decent person. You believe he must be some approximation of the person he puts out there on film. And when you meet Sam, he's better than that. He's kinder than that. He's even more intelligent than you would ever imagine. He's very thoughtful, he's very sincere, and he speaks from the heart, and so you can trust Sam.
At this stage, I should say, of my career, after 49 years in the business, I want to do good stuff. You know, I don't care the size of it. It doesn't have to be a big studio film, but I want it to be good stuff. You know, and I've been very fortunate the last several years that some really good stuff has come my way. And I think this is just another piece of that puzzle.
I got a phone call from Sam Elliott at my house, and he said he'd like to talk about the movie. And we had about an hour phone call, and at the end of that call he said, this character reminds me something of my father and something of decency, which I think is fading in the world. And he said, I think that I could say something here. I think this movie could be a way that I could say something that I want to say right now. And at the end of that call, he said, I'm going to do it.
I just think that this whole concept that Bob came up with, I think it has some really important things to say. I think it's very entertaining. And I think this, you know, the stretch that he makes, the fantasy part of it, I think is really an interesting treatment. And unrequited love is always an interesting tale to weave into something.
The character that you see in this film is something that I think he really brought to the movie fully realized. And he will credit the script and I will credit Sam. So we'll just keep bouncing back and forth forever on who really made that thing happen. But I don't think that there are many actors that could have inhabited this part the way that Sam Elliott did. I don't even know if there is another person that was as right for this movie. There was something cosmically right about Sam playing this part.
You know, I think Calvin, at the heart of it, is a decent man, you know, without question. You know, and he says in that scene in which they come to recruit him that he always did what they asked him to do. And he was a soldier, he was a patriot. And like a lot of those guys, I think he came out of the war with some sort of PTSD and was totally unsettled by the fact that he'd killed people and never really got past that. You know, something that he lives with. I mean, some people are comfortable with, you know, some military people are comfortable with that, and they just say, well, it's part of the job, and that's what I'm in there for, because that's what they are there for. That's why we send them into war or into conflicts, and I think Calvin suffered from it, you know, was wounded by it, so to speak. But you couple that with this whole thing about Hitler and the Nazis, and look at what's happening in our world at this particular moment in time. This film could not be more relevant than it is. No, I shot someone during the war. But the words, you know, the words, Bob's words are just incredible. The stuff with Ed, the stuff with the brother, the scene in the barber shop with Ed was just, you know, heartbreaking in some ways.
This idea of brothers, that there's two love stories that emerge in the movie. There's the love story between Bar and Maxine, and then there's a love story between two brothers that have become slightly estranged, and then by the end, reconnect. And it took the killing of Bigfoot to reconnect these brothers. And again, I think that that's symbolic for any number of things that can happen in our life that draw us apart and then pull us back together.
You know, the crazy thing is, these are my clothes. And I wore these from the hotel to the set. And they saw them and said, you know what, it's good enough.
We went through a lot of actors to try to discover who was the right Ed, and I really, really wanted a comedian to play Ed. I felt like an actor like Sam would stand for a certain type of American hero in kind of the perfect way, and I felt like a brother like Ed needed to almost come from a completely different background in real life. So I was looking at musicians and I was looking at comedians, and Larry said, I'd love to be a part of this, and came to Massachusetts, and he delivered this really, really subdued, honest, sweet, searching portrait of this brother who's very, very different from Sam Elliott's character, Calvin Barr, who goes to war and does all these heroic things. He stands for one type of American ideal, and then Ed stands for the other side, which is the thing that I think soldiers are seeking to protect, is a more simple way of American life, where he's a barber and he has a family and he has obligations to his community that are very important to him. And I think that they're the same and different in some ways. And I think that they're both jealous, but in not a envious, poisonous way. They're jealous in kind of a way where they look up to one another. I think Calvin Barr looks up to Ed because it's a life that he was never going to have, and I think Ed looks up to Barr's heroism. And I think in America that's really interesting, that we might look up to each other, though we've both done things that are completely valid, if that makes sense. So that's what I wanted Ed's character to say, and I think when Larry performed it, he deepened it in a way that I hadn't even expected. I had hoped that there would be comedic elements to it, and I'd hoped that it would be very sweet and very soulful, and then Larry brought this other dimension to it.
I'm going fishing now, which is going to be great. Technically, I've never been fishing, but that's the fun of a movie. I can look, like I told the director, Bob, that even though I've never been fishing and I have no idea what I'm doing, I said, don't worry, the first couple of takes may be me crying and screaming, but don't worry.
I was spending a lot of time trying to find the right actor to match Sam Elliott. Once we knew it was Sam, it became very apparent that it wasn't going to be easy to find somebody that kind of matched the unpretentious cool of Sam Elliott. You know, Sam has that kind of Norman Rockwell thing about him, but he has this other thing that's very unique to him, and so the casting became kind of about that. We couldn't find anybody in America, and I thought, well, we need to look at some of the Irish actors, we need to look at some of the British actors, we need to kind of think outside the box and see if we can find somebody who can be Sam without doing an impersonation of him, and bring something special to this role that doesn't necessarily feel so much like a impression of him as much as kind of a spiritual connection to him. And I started watching Poldark, and I made it about 4 or 5 episodes in, and every 4 or 5 minutes I'd see this flash of that's Sam Elliott. He just did something like Sam. He just did a mannerism or a trait or a voice that reminded me of Sam in the late 70s and mid 80s. And he met Sam. They got to have a crossover of a weekend, so they got to spend some time together and talk to each other. And I just said, I don't really want you to impersonate Sam. I want it to be a more spiritual connection. I want you to be the more hopeful, optimistic, in love version of this person that he grows into. But no one can do that voice. No one can do that thing that Sam does exactly the way he does.
That looked great. Let's keep the door closed.
Okay, copy that.
Sorry.
Step over and leave Kelsey here while they put this lens. Hey, Kelsey. Yep. Just let me know as soon as
Take
the
these
lens-
pants. You like them?
If you want to stand
How much?
near set.
Yeah, can you take this forward?
Voice went up an octave, I think. Have to bring it back down to some Sam Elliott territory. Bring it right down. Bring him down.
Aiden had his own special thing that he had this series of very subtle mannerisms that he tied to Sam, and when we were working together, he'd always ask, how would Sam do this? But it wasn't so much how would he perform it, it was what would his body language be like? Where would, how would his head be tilted? What would his shoulders be like? And I think he pulled it off in a really, really special way.
Hey.
So out of 500 people that auditioned for Kelly Roy, Caitlin's performance seemed the most human, and it really matched the type of person I feel like someone like Sam Elliott, someone like Aiden, someone like Calvin Barr would gravitate toward. I felt like in some ways she's more capable, she's more sure of herself, she's more strong, she knows who she is, she knows where she's going, she knows what she wants. And I feel like Barr is always in flux on all of those things, and so he would look up to her. And I wanted a character, I wanted an actress that felt very much like Barr would look up to her. And when I saw Caitlin's performance, I thought this is the right person. Extremely human, funny, sweet, sad, brought all of the elements together, and it just became very obvious to Kelly and I that this was the right person for the part.
I just trust Bob with my life. I can't say enough good things about him, and his sensitivity to the story, and his very clear vision. Didn't expect to end up someplace like this when I left class today. So the lovely girl we only see in the 1940 section of the film, and she and Calvin have this like good old-fashioned romance, and it was really moving and quite sad and to shoot it, but beautiful, and reminded me of my grandmother when my grandfather went off to war, and the letters she wrote, and it felt incredibly sweet and incredibly real.
There is an aspect to her character for a woman in the 1940s to kind of be so certain of who she is and what she wants, and that she's in control of her destiny, and she leaves when she decides that the relationship can't continue for whatever reason. And that at every turn, if you're kind of watching her character, she's making all of the choices for Barr, and Barr is following her lead.
Hey.
Let's take a walk.
And so she's kind of leading his character along, and then the echo in his life that she leaves behind carries all the way through to the end of the film, this vacuum that she leaves.
The love of her life leaves and she never sees him again. That's pretty terrible. But I also, I love her boldness in going after the man she loves. You know, she's certainly more assertive than Calvin, and kind of takes the reins, and especially for that time, feels quite bold, and I love her for that.
The function of the movie is this love story and what we exchange when we serve others. And so Barr, in the service of his country, in the service of others, exchanged everything that would have made him happy. And I think that that's a lot of people in this world, and kind of many positions, be it a soldier, a teacher, a nurse. You exchange a lot when you serve another person. And I wanted to illustrate that through Barr, not just as a soldier, but as a human being that was willing to exchange himself for everybody else.
Sam said a beautiful thing, which is that he was thinking, I haven't met him yet, but can't wait to. He said to Bob that he was always thinking of me while they were shooting, and I love that so much. And Calvin is, I mean, he's like this pure creature in a lot of ways, who gets tainted by the world.
I think any of us that have had a relationship along in their life that, you know, isn't fulfilled, or there's still vestiges of it, you know, that spoke to me as well. I totally get that. And it's an interesting element to bring to this tale about Bigfoot. You know?
You know, it's like being the last of the Mohegans or something like that. Is, you know, who can I talk to? Who can I interact with? Who understands where I'm coming from? You know, I was saying my father's still living, and you know, there are very few. I don't know if there's anybody left from his army unit. You know, and you get to be the last man standing, and yes, you can still engage with the world, but there's this whole population of people who are the people you interacted with, who knew your story, who you shared culture with, who you shared life with, who are gone. And then you figure if this is in fact the last of the Bigfoot, how lonely that must be.
I chose the Bigfoot for this movie because I believe that the Bigfoot, if it were to exist, it's incredibly close to us. It would be extremely rare. I pictured it being lonely. I pictured it being maybe the last of its kind. And I started thinking very much of the Bigfoot as being kind of a mirror to this hero. Lonely, the last of its kind, feeling its age, feeling like it doesn't belong in the world anymore. And so I saw the Bigfoot as a mirror to the great American hero. You know, we spent a lot of time, I'd done conceptual designs of it, and I brought it to Spectral Motion. They were my absolute top choice for who I would like to collaborate with. They had done Hellboy and Stranger Things and tons of creature movies. And I just knew that they could execute something that was physical and practical, that Sam, or whoever the actor would be at the time, would be able to act off of, because I wanted kind of an old-fashioned universal monster, which is essentially a guy in a suit. And that's very simple. And nowadays, there's a lot of CG that can amplify a performance or can make the creature kind of do anything. And in this case, we wanted to just make it very real and very human, and something we were able to capture in camera.
He's a mythic character that has history, that's self-aware. So I was thinking about those things, think about this character, try and get in the psychological space of this character. Always thinking about the fact that he's the only one, he's the last one, he's ancient, he's got a lot of miles on him, and he's very diseased, and he's been causing a lot of death and decay.
There's a great shot in A Gary Wrath of God where they're going down the river, and there's this horse on the raft with them. And at one point, for whatever reason, they get into rapids or something, and the horse swims ashore, and they just have to leave it. And you realize That's the only horse in the Amazon basin. That's going to be one lonely horse as long as he doesn't get eaten by something. He's not going to find any other horses hanging out there. And what a feeling that must be.
Right. Blah, blah, blah. Is that okay?
I'm all with
Beat
you,
'em right
Bob.
down the hill.
I'm with you 100%.
All these remarkable artists have come together to work on this project for a first-time director. He was very clear. He was very certain of what he wanted, which is not always the case with directors. And it's, as a performer, if they're not, if director's not clear about what he wants, you want them to be able to communicate to you that, or make you feel safe in improvising or creating the character yourself to some degree. And Bob does all that. I felt like I was creating the character, but at the same time, I understood what he wanted. He made it very clear what he wanted. But I was able to walk around within that.
What kind of came out of the project was this strangely sentimental, strangely sincere, really bizarre film with a strange structure and cult elements, but also just very basic, kind of romantic, adventurous storytelling, but also this weird sincerity that keeps it all together. It makes it really charming and fun to watch, and it kind of gets to your heart.
One of the reference points Bob gave me was Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea, which I had never read, and I actually read while we were prepping the film, and could see the connections there, the elegant way the story is told, and the kind of the pathos to it. All were things that Bob was chasing when he was putting it together, and he managed to capture it on film in a beautiful way.
It's a very black and white story of what it means to be a hero, and I think in today's world, when everybody is so involved in promoting themselves and on social media and trying to talk, it's all about, me. This is a story about a man who basically sacrifices everything, and nobody really knows the fact that he literally not just saves the world once, but he goes on a mission to save the world twice.
I feel very fortunate that this thing came across my path, and it came at a time when I didn't really want to go to work. I was burned out and tired, and I'm more burned out and tired than I was when I showed up. But, Calvin Barr was burned out and tired too, so I justified it with that. I've been tired ever since I got to town, and I'm going home exhausted, but it's okay because Calvin was in those same shoes. I'm just fortunate to be here. I'm fortunate to have a job anywhere at this point in my career, I think, on some level. And the fact that Bob thought enough to really want me to come and be part of it and play Barr, it was just a real gift. I always look at these kind of things as a gift.
We all have this pain and this fear of loss and this desire to celebrate decency. All of those feelings are the feelings that created this project, and that I think brought John Sayles and brought Doug Trumbull and brought Lucky McKee to it. But I feel like if you want an exploitation movie, if you want a movie that is completely bonkers and violent and chaotic and exploitive, those exist. Within the wheelhouse of this movie, or at least your expectation of this movie, that exists. And so if you want to find that movie, you can find it really easily. But I think that there's room for a movie like this that delivers on that promise and yet is also about something a little bit more. There has to be room for both in cinema.
So there it is. And that's it.